Welcome, mentors. We are excited to jump into Module 11 of Education 504 and 511, Mentor Teacher Training. We've explored feedback, SMART goals, coaching cycles, co-planning, co-teaching for growth. Today, we're focusing on what happens when, despite all that planning, our mentees need us to pivot. And so our focus today is adaptive mentoring, adjusting course to meet mentee needs. Adaptive mentoring means continuously analyzing evidence and adjusting support to meet mentee needs and improve classroom instruction. Effective mentors are responsive, not reactive. We make strategic changes informed by evidence, reflection, and partnership. In this research, studies on instructional coaching by Kraft, Blazer, and some of the foremost experts in the field emphasize that coaching is most effective when it's ongoing, it's iterative, and it's adaptive. In other words, flexibility is not a sign of inconsistency, it's a marker of expertise. We're going to explore when to adjust, how to adjust, and how to document and measure those changes for meaningful mentee growth. All right, let's go ahead and get started. This is a skill building session. It's not just theory. I want you to walk away with practical, repeatable strategies to refine your support of your mentee. Our objectives are to identify signals, which helps mentors detect when growth has stalled or possibly even reversed. We want to select adjustment strategies that ensure our coaching remains targeted and effective. We want to use the mid-course check protocol to formalize reflection and prevent mentoring from becoming guesswork. We want to make sure that we are aligning with instructional leadership frameworks and continuous improvement cycles. Both NITE and NIET highlight that these are the most effective ways. Adaptive mentoring mirrors this data-driven decision-making that we expect from teachers analyzing student data. The goal isn't to do more coaching, it's to do smarter coaching that meets mentees where they are. Think about your own mentoring. Has every plan gone exactly as expected? Explaining sometimes to a mentee what you want them to do is much more complex than it seems on the surface. No two mentees and no two classrooms are identical. Research states that coaching interventions improve teaching practice significantly more than one-time professional development because they're iterative, meaning mentors adapt support based on data and observation. Just as teachers differentiate instruction for diverse learners, mentors differentiate coaching for diverse mentees. Adaptive mentoring doesn't mean changing the goal. It means changing the path to the goal. When we can adjust based on formative evidence, we strengthen alignment between mentee effort, instructional improvement, and student outcomes. Successful mentors are constantly scanning for evidence of stagnation. If growth has plateaued, it's time to analyze why. So here are some signals that we need to consider in our coaching plan and in the coaching cycle, particularly the monitoring and adjusting portions. Repeated observations show little or no change. This suggests that the strategy might not be practical, clear, or scaffolded enough for the mentee. Another signal could be that student data aren't improving. Instructional change must ultimately impact the learners. If it doesn't, we need to revisit the root cause. Another signal is mentee confusion or frustration. a clear indicator that cognitive overload or lack of clarity is hindering progress. And this is when we really need to be sensitive to those social and emotional needs. Most often, we are mentoring novice teachers or aspiring educators. Adjusting to the workload and the work balance of our profession is sometimes a huge it's a huge weight, and it's just it's insurmountable for some of them. And so it's difficult for them sometimes to focus on what we want them to do as far as instruction, the instructional coaching aspect of their work, because they feel overwhelmed by all of the work. And so sometimes the mentee confusion or frustration isn't really about the coaching plan, it's about other things. And that's where we need to be sensitive to those needs, match resources when we can, and make sure that we are trying to meet those social and emotional needs before just plowing through with a professional plan. A mismatch approach is another signal that we need to be looking for. Sometimes mentors are coaching too indirectly or too intensively for where the mentee is developmentally. Again, we talked about triangulating data in one of our previous lessons, but this is another place where we really need to triangulate data. We need to look at observation notes. We need to look at student work, mentee self-reflection. We need to look at the mentee's own evaluation of their competencies. It's also sometimes valuable, and we'll talk about this in our next session, but to collaborate with other stakeholders, assistant principals, maybe they have PLC, a PLC mentor or something like that. And we need to triangulate that data. Research underscores that multiple data sources give a fuller picture of progress and readiness for change. Don't assume that lack of progress means lack of effort. It may simply signal a need to recalibrate the support. So we want to reinforce that these are things that have to be deliberate in adjusting changes to our coaching plan. These should not be random things. So we want to reinforce that to the mentee so that the mentee doesn't think that, this is, we're willy-nilly changing things and we don't have a plan in place. We want to reinforce that we are skilled mentors and we are selecting the right type and level of support based on data. Jim Knight's coaching partnership principles underscore that coaches move fluidly between roles, sometimes modeling, sometimes facilitating reflection, depending on the mentee's need and readiness. For example, if a mentee struggles with behavior management routines, which was our previous portfolio, try modeling a transition and debriefing afterward what that looks like, what the stages are. If a mentee is competent but inconsistent, try video analysis with reflective questioning. Having them look at brief video clips of their instruction can really make the change for them, because sometimes seeing it in action rather than being within their own bodies doing the action is exactly what they need to be able to make the moves that we need them to make. If the mentee is ready for autonomy, let's move toward collaborative co-planning instead of directive feedback. Every adjustment should be intentional, evidence-based, and time limited. Effective mentoring means selecting the smallest possible adjustment to have the largest possible impact. Introduce some particular toolkits that could be used. So, for example, be transparent with them and explain the toolkit for them. So, for example, one of them that's systematic but not overwhelming is the 4-step mid-course check. It is a repeatable structure that can be used for reflection, and mentors actually pause mid-coaching cycle to see if evidence shows growth, deciding what adjustments to make, and documenting them. So it's a brief observation, compare what's going on to the goal, choose an adjustment to make in the plan, and document the adjustment. So That's something very small, very quick to do. For example, I recently, was working on a questioning. Um, one of my residents was struggling to create higher order questions for her students. She's actually working with a high quality curriculum, but the level of questioning often, even in some of our high quality curriculum, it the 1 day lessons leave students at sometimes at a low level depth of knowledge. They're doing a lot of recall in some of the lessons. They may only get to, level 3 and 4 depth of knowledge in some of maybe once or twice a week in some of the curricula. So we wanted to make that thinking more a common practice of her classroom. She just wasn't really sure how to do it. So we had talked about using Webb's depth of knowledge stems. That was working pretty well most of the time. But what she was struggling with were the follow-up questions that students needed to be able, because they really didn't have a lot of practice with those critical thinking skills, they needed those follow-up probing questions. So I observed that that seemed to be where the issue was. We looked and we saw that it was really affecting on the thinking and problem solving portion of the rubric. The adjustment that we chose was to include several follow-up questions with potential anticipated student responses um, to her lesson plan. And, she felt a little bit overwhelmed. So we went on Magic School Bus, put in some things. She felt much, much better about it. We documented this change. This is what we were doing. So every lesson, in addition to the 2 critical thinking questions, she was also going to create some follow-up probing questions with some potential student answers. And that small adjustment was documented within the larger plan. So this is what we're talking about with a quick 4-step mid-course check. The mini data check helps mentors look at small, concrete pieces of data instead of relying on impressions. So it can be observation notes, student exit tickets, mentee self-rating, a short video reflection, as we talked about before, encourages mentees to self-assess. And I have found that, again, this is one of the most effective, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And lastly, maybe a coaching log, some sort of template to ensure accountability and shared documentation. It can be created in like a live document, like a Google Doc, that you both can put data in. And it would allow the mentee to see patterns over time and to daily track progress toward the goal. This is particularly meaningful for mentors who are perhaps not in the same shared space every day with their mentees. This can be very helpful in kind of pushing some of that autonomy and agency, a coaching log template that you both have access to and can see. So we want to make sure that adaptive mentoring is not something that's going to be done randomly. Systematically do it. Use a tool, a practical tool that shows responsiveness. Otherwise, our good intentions actually could just turn into some inconsistencies and even confusion for our mentee. So the mentor version of formative assessment is the mid-course check. Step 1, of course, is gathering evidence. Mentors should use no more than 3 data points. It keeps analysis manageable for this mid-course check. Data can get overwhelming, and I definitely encourage the triangulation, but be careful about including too much because that can get confusing, and also be consistent with the data that you choose throughout the cycle. You don't want to switch data points up. Compare progress to the original SMART goal. Identify what's improving and maybe what's stuck. Choose 1 or 2 specific adjustments, never more than that. It's confusing and it can actually diffuse the impact that we want to have. And then, of course, we want to document success criteria. So, for example, be explicit. What should we see differently in 2 to 3 weeks? Research consistently shows that short cycles of goal, feedback, adjustment yield the strongest outcomes for teacher growth. So this step actually formalizes that cycle so that mentors and mentees have a shared roadmap forward. So the mid-course check is actually something really good to do. And I highly recommend somewhere along the line plugging it into your coaching plan. So mentors should consistently be analyzing what signals suggested um, suggest specific actions. And so we're going to look at this brief case study and we are going to consider the options that we could use. So our scenario is that a mentee is a seventh grade ELA teacher. The SMART goal was to increase the use of text-dependent questions to deepen student analysis. And of course, we would need to, put a time limit and things on that, which we would when we fleshed it out. But for the sake of this slide, I kept it that way. Our evidence is coach's observation or the mentor's observation. Show the teacher asks mainly recall questions. So this is similar to what I was talking about earlier. Student exit tickets show 35% analytical responses. The mentee reports attempts but lose time during lessons. And this is common. We can't, sometimes we don't get to those levels of critical thinking that we would like. Sometimes we don't plan for them. So the suggested adjustment would be to shorten the focus to one high leverage question type, text dependent, for 2 lessons. The coach then should model one lesson and at least a portion of a lesson about how to formulate the question, how to integrate it within the lesson, and how to, of course, do it correctly. Wait time, think time, probing follow-up questions, etc. And the coach should co-plan at least 2 scripted questions with the mentee, showing them where to embed it in the lesson plan. Then, using a video clip of about 2 minutes, have the mentor and the mentee can do it alone, but it's great when you can watch together, and then have a 10-minute reflection after the next lesson. So observe how it's done. Observe how the mentee integrates it within the lesson, and then have just a brief 10-minute reflection after it's integrated into the lesson. And then set the success criteria for 60% of students producing an analytical sentence on the exit ticket in the next 2 weeks. So we're not talking 100% here, and we're not even asking for double. We're just doing something reasonable, and so that's where it's achievable. So narrowing the focus reduces the cognitive load and increases the depth for our mentee. Modeling provides a live demonstration of the desired behavior. It might take a few models, okay? To be honest, maybe one time won't be enough. Using a short video reflection can empower the mentee to self-identify growth areas. And then, of course, defining the success criteria keeps everyone focused on outcomes rather than effort. We want to connect this back to research that remember those iterative cycles of focused support and evidence-based adjustments are actually the strongest predictors of instructional improvement. So this brief case study is pretty common. This specific one was increasing the use of text-dependent questions to deepen student analysis. I'm sure you can think of several other goals. Notice how it is going to be tied to student outcomes. So that's very important as well. So we have to address common pitfalls. And then, of course, we want to consider how to avoid them. Note that changing everything at once makes it impossible to see which change worked. Focus on one adjustment at a time. It's sort of like when you're doing allergy testing. If you've ever done something like that, or an intolerance testing, it's it can be when you make too many changes at one time, it really can be difficult to note, what's causing the allergic reaction. So focus on one adjustment at a time, no more than two for sure. Um, Personalizing lack of progress really damages the trust that you built with the mentee. Instead, constantly use objective data. Let's look together at what the evidence shows. Let's examine the exit tickets. Let's keep track in the next one. Let's use tally marks in the next lesson of um, how many, you know, how many times you're per this week, let's say this week, how many times you're able to actually embed a critical thinking question in, your Bayou Bridges lessons. So looking at the data together can take the stigma off of, man, you're not doing it. You're not getting, you're not getting there. You're not getting where we need you to be. That really stigmatizes someone's self-perception of their professional capacity to grow. So we do not want to personalize the lack of progress. Keep it focused on the data. Switching too soon undermines consistency. Every strategy needs time to take root, and we have to give both the mentee and the students time to adjust to the change. So keep that in mind. Omitting the mentee voice can actually breed resistance. Collaboratively deciding adjustments increases ownership and commitment. So don't be, autocratic in making these changes. Make sure that you're using those coaching conversations to not just include them, but to give them a strong voice in the changes that they're going to make in their lesson delivery, their lesson planning, their execution. They have to understand why, and they have to understand what before they can actually do it. Remind the mentees that they are at the heart of these changes. Yes, we're definitely focused on student success, but we also want them to grow professionally, and we want them that their own professional self-efficacy to grow. Adaptation is not something we do to mentees. It's something that we do with mentees. So adaptive mentoring is an ongoing stance, not a one-time decision. I want to invite you to reflect on one change you plan to make in the next coaching cycle. Create a sense of growth in your own ability to coach. I encourage you to document your reflection in a coaching log, or you will have an opportunity, of course, within this portfolio to document that as well. I also want to remind you that adaptation is how mentors honor both their mentees' professional agency and their students' needs. The best mentors are learners as well, and that's something that we consistently want to model. I also want to encourage you to read these amazing resources. Pick one of them. They're really fantastic. And the slide deck, of course, is based on this research, but these readings collectively reinforce the importance of evidence-informed decision-making in mentoring. So a quote that I love from Kraft et al. In The Effective Teacher Coaching on Instruction and Achievement is, the quality of teacher learning depends not on the amount of coaching, but on the quality and adaptability of the feedback loop. So happy mentoring, happy coaching, and please reach out if you have any questions.